Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, I'm continuing my trek through the era of Disney films known as the Disney Renaissance. This is the second entry in it. This, of course, is The Rescuers Down Under. My DVD copy of it, along with the original The Rescuers. I would be showing up my VHS, but looking over there, it looks like I can no longer have it for some reason. But one of these days I'm going to have to rectify and get it just for copy's sake. But this is a film that is directed by Hendel Butoy, and sorry if I mispronounced that, who also directed two segments from Fantasia 2000, and Mike Gabriel, who would go on to direct Pocahontas, and also worked previously as an animator on The Fox and the Hound, Oliver and Company, and The Black Cauldron. This was the film released in 1990, and of the films in the Disney Renaissance, especially the early one, this seems to be the one that more in retrospect is loved. At the time was loved by critics, but did not make as much money as it should have. And I'm glad to see that it actually is getting a lot of love in retrospect. But me, growing up in this era, I did not know that, because this is a film I always watched. But it's one of those things that you find out when you actually do your look into it more in retrospect. Now, a big little question that I think a lot of people will wonder when they see that this film was made is why? And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's more a curiosity thing, because for the time period this film was made, it's an anomaly. Because think about it. Until recently, Disney was not in the habit of making theatrical sequels to their pre-existing films. At least their animated films. Nowadays, we get Moana 2, we get Frozen 2, Zootopia 2, whether you think the films need a sequel or not, we got them. But this was the first one. And after this, the only theatrical sequels were Return to Neverland and Jungle Book 2. Both films I saw in theaters and I did remember enjoying, but that was it. Every other sequel was direct-to-video, which is going to start in a couple years after this film came out. And this film underperforming box office-wise like it did is probably the reason for it, but it showed that there was an audience. Now, part of the reason that it was made was that this film's predecessor, The Rescuers, when it was released to the rental market in the 80s, one of the few that was, and there's a whole big thing we could talk about with that, about why certain weren't sold, but it was one of the ones that was. It was super successful. It made $41 million in rentals, and then of course there's also the re-releases to factor in. When they saw that, Michael Eisner and Katzenberg approved a sequel, and they decided to go with the Australian sequel because it was because of a little film in the 80s called Crocodile Dundee, and its sequel, Crocodile Dundee 2. And they figured, like, hey, yeah, Australia's hit. And of course, that's where we get the subtitle, Down Under. And of course, they approached Gabriel to help direct. He was actually asked twice. The first time was when he was working on Oliver and Company, and that was mostly complete. And he only accepted when the second time the Walt Disney Feature Animation president, Peter Schneider, called him into his office to talk about him, and he accepted. And it's actually, the screenplay is credited to 4 separate people. Like I said on the back of that, obviously. Jim Cox, Karey Kirkpatrick, Byron Simpson, and Joe Ranft. And the music was done by Bruce Broughton, who, if that name sounds familiar, he also did a bunch of other films. All these ones I have listed except one are from my childhood. We got The Monster Squad, classic horror comedy. We got Homeward Bound, The Incredible Journey, another film I'm going to talk about on here one of these days. The remake of Miracle on 34th Street, which I have it over there. And Tombstone, which I've heard snippets of the score, but I haven't actually watched the film. And, of course, once again, we got Bob Newhart voicing Bernard. We got Eva Gabor voices Miss Bianca, and this was her last role before her 1995 death, which, as an aside, which is why a third film that they were going to do, which I'm assuming would have been direct-to-video, was canceled in 96 after she passed away. We got John Candy playing the role of Wilbur, which he's having a lot of fun in this film, and voice acting wise. He has some of the funniest moments. In fact, there's a couple lines of his that I always work into conversations. Like, I'm ready to hit the beaches. Yeah, I'm even ready to mambo. Of course, Adam Ryan voices Cody. Then, of course, the legendary George C. Scott voicing our villain Percival C. McLeach, and he's having some fun, too. Of course, there's a couple lines of dialogue of his that if you heard it, you'd be quoting it a lot. Did you know there was a razorback in my truck? These are not Joanna eggs. Of course, their legendary Frank Welker providing the vocals for both Mayor Hootie the Eagle and Joanna the Lizard. And then, of course, Tristan Rogers is Jake. Now, the film is also another anomaly for the Disney Renaissance, is it's one of the few that is a non-musical. The only other one that you could kind of put in there is Tarzan, and even then, it's not really a traditional musical. It has musical scenes, but it's like music videos within the movie. Like montages. They're not really true musical numbers. But it's like, it kind of goes more in that direction. It's just the characters aren't singing themselves. Here, no music. And that was a decision made early on so that it wouldn't distract from it. I mean, we don't even get a reprise of Rescue Aid Society. But considering how the scene around that is, it would have been distracting. Now, since I got that, I probably should discuss the plot real quick. The plot is it begins in the Australian Outback, where we meet the kid Cody, who is an animal lover, something as a kid and even an adult I really get, because I love animals. You get right, Odie. You get right. Love animals. And he goes and meets with his buddies in the Outback, and it turns out Mayor Hootie, the Great Golden Eagle, has been trapped by a poacher. So he climbs up the cliff, saves Mayor Hootie. She freaks out a bit when she sees a knife, accidentally knocks him over the cliff, saves him. We get an excellent flying scene, which, if you were to do a list of the best moments in the Disney Renaissance, this entire opening from the credits to the end of this flying scene, magnificent. This is a beauty of animation. And of course, you combine it with Bruce's score, classic. This is one of those moments that as a kid, this is what made me love animation. I mean, there's a lot of moments in films that I could say made me love film in general. Like the whole of the movie King Kong, some aspects of the original RoboCop. And you could definitely say the opening for this scene, just the way that those flying scenes are. And this is where that thing I mentioned in the overview video comes into play, where Hayao Miyazaki was an inspiration. Those flying scenes were, because I guess a lot of his films, especially in the 80s, featured elaborate aerial scenes. I haven't really seen a lot of his 80s films, so I can't comment on it, but it's probably going to be one thing I'm going to notice when I get around to watching his 80s films. I'm going to be like, oh, there's the inspiration. Because you usually can see it. Like, for example, I know that there's a certain scene in Star Wars that was inspired by The Searchers, but I've not seen The Searchers yet, so I can't comment on that scene, but I'm probably going to note it when I see it. And that lovely scene. Eventually, Cody finds himself in the clutches of the poacher that caught Mayor Hootie, which is Percival C. McLeach, because he tries to rescue a mouse that's caught in another trap. McLeach eventually realizes that Cody has seen the eagle because he has a feather from the eagle when Mayor Hootie trusted him enough to take him to her nest. And of course, McLeach captures the boy, and this is where you could really see that George C. Scott is having fun voicing the character. My mom will call the Rangers. Oh, not the Rangers. What do I do? Oh, don't let your mom call the Rangers, please. And this is also where you see Welker voicing Joanna. Perfect casting there. Just even though all of his vocal work is just animal noises, he put some fun into it too. McLeach throws the kid's backpack into the crocodile-infested waters, and then kidnaps him. And the mouse that he saved sees him, and they send out the word. And of course, we get the word going across the Pacific all the way to the West Coast and across the country to the East Coast. And that's where the Rescue Aid Society hears this and decides that they're going to have to send Bernard and Miss Bianca. Now, since the first film, where Bernard was the janitor for the Rescue Aid Society that got pulled into becoming a member by Miss Bianca, he now is an official member and the representative for the United States. Now, they're at dinner when we first see them, and we can see that they have grown closer since their work in the first film. Now, it's to the point where Bernard is going to ask Miss Bianca to marry him, which that tells me he has romantic feelings for her. Miss Bianca, it's a little coy throughout most of the film whether she feels the same, but you can make the argument she does. And is just waiting for him, which I'm just going to do it in spoiler. He does ask and she does accept, but that's a will they or won't they thing all throughout the film. And this is one of those things where you don't really need to have watched the first film to fully get it, but having watched it at least once, even if you're not a big fan of the first one, but you really like the sequel, it adds that context. Like, with me, I never owned that film when I was a kid, but I watched it. It was one of the films I could borrow from our neighbor a couple down, watch it. I could watch it on TV, rent it. So I got that context. It's just one for whatever reason I didn't own, right? Because it was out of print or something. I don't know. And one of the ones my grandparents decided not to do the VHS to VHS bootleg version of, like they did with other films like Pinocchio and Robin Hood. They get the memo and they agree to go to Australia. Now, there is a little bit of that marriage humor in here where Bernard does not realize that's what Miss Bianca's talking about until they get up there. And, of course, they go to try to get a flight, and they see that Orville is not there, which the reason he's not in this film is because his voice actor sadly passed away during the pre-production process. So that's why they decided to get a replacement and, of course, continue with the Wright brothers thing. Where, okay, his name is Orville, he's going to have a brother named Wilbur. And that's where we get John Candy and his introduction scene, where we really see how much of a fun character Wilbur is. Now, Wilbur initially does not want to take the job that they want because it's that night and there's a blizzard going out. But when he hears a kid is in danger, he agrees to it, and they fly. They eventually get to Australia, and this is, of course, where they meet Jake, the kangaroo mouse, even though kangaroo mouses are not native to Australia, but it's too tempting a joke to do. But you could say he's a transplant or an invasive kangaroo mouse that just happens to be a local by assimilation. It's just one of those things. Now, this is where they do an interesting thing. Most of the times when they go in this direction, it's going to be a love triangle. And it's technically an unofficial one. Because Jake, you can tell, has an interest in Miss Bianca. Bernard notices. Whether Miss Bianca notices or not, they never really comment on. But in the end, when Bernard does get it, he doesn't get all butthurt and all that. He's like, oh yeah. He's like, good for them. So he's now a good friend of theirs. And his whole thing in the plot is to guide them over to McLeach's. Now, while they're going there to try to find and rescue Cody, McLeach is grilling Cody to try to find out where Mayor Hootie's nest is. And he's going all through plans. I mean, this is where we get to know Joanna Eggs thing. But, of course, McLeach is going to eventually find out. He's going to capture Mayor Hootie. Now, Cody's going to try to save Mayor Hootie. The mice are going to try to save him. And it's all back and forth that leads to an excellent climax. And, of course, since this is a Disney film, the villain does get his comeuppance, and it does follow the tradition of Disney villains falling to their deaths instead of over a cliff. It's over a cliff, but it's not in the same manner as, like, let's say, the Wicked Queen falling over, Gaston falling. McLeach goes over a waterfall. And this is one of those ones that you watch it and you're like, ooh, that's pretty brutal. And what makes it also is George C. Scott's vocals as he's going over. There he's all getting caught monologuing and like, oh crap. And there's also a little bit of comedic with it involving Joanna and the crocodiles. I'm not going to spoil that, but it's fun to watch. But it's one of those things at the beginning part of it, you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely an animated film, because if you know anything about how saltwater crocodiles actually attack, McLeach probably would have been dead before he got to the waterfall. But it's one of those things in animation, you just go with it, and it's just fun to watch. And of course, these crocodiles are not animated in the same way the alligators in the original one are, but I think that's what makes them stand out a little bit more, where they're like realistic animated crocodiles. And of course, Mayor Hootie and Cody both are saved, so happy ending. And ends on a little bit of a comedic note with John Candy. I'm not going to spoil, but it's one of the things that makes him great as a comedic side character. That, and of course, when he's in the doctor's office, that's going to hurt. It's just little asides. The epidural, what? And it's just watching this that I'm surprised that this film was financially a flop comparatively. I didn't put it in the notes, at least that I'm spotting, so let me just I'm going to check to see like what the budget and all that was real quick. Rescuers Down Under, here we go. Alright. It was made for $30 million, and that's $30 million in the late 80s, early 90s money. and it made only $27.9 million, and that's worldwide. Of course, that's in the theatrical run. It's definitely made its money more back in VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray releases. But think about that. It did not even break. It did not even get over to the point where it made its budget back, let alone going with Hollywood accounting and needing to make 60 to break even. So that tells you all that. And of course, to go with that, part of the reason for that is its competition around there. It was ranked 4th when it was released, after Home Alone, Rocky V, and Child's Play 2. But the sad thing is that after that, Katzenberg recalled the film's TV advertisement, and for a film in its initial release, that's going to be the death sentence. So that's definitely what killed it. And I've also heard a little bit that right before it came out, they kind of lost faith in the film, and the only reason they released it is because of how far into production they were. And they went from there. And if that's the case, no wonder it was kind of seen as a black sheep at the time. And even with all that, part of me has a feeling that because of when this film was made and came out so early in the Renaissance before we even had the term, on a whole, there was probably still that little feeling about Disney films, like, they'll make a good one, then they'll make an one. Coming from the end of the Bronze Age into the Dark Age of the 80s. I mean, before this we had The Little Mermaid, then we had Oliver and Company and The Great Mouse Detective. Riding high on those ones. But you could have had a little bit of that, plus the marketing. It's no wonder it did poorly, but I'm glad to see that it does have a life on home video, and critics loved it. Like, I haven't really been doing a lot of this in the notes, but here's what the Rotten Tomatoes consensus is. The Rescuers Down Under achieves moments of genuine wonder while adding Outback flavor to its charmingly modest stories, making for a sequel that outdoes the original. Yeah, the story is modest. It's pretty straightforward, and at just a little bit over an hour, yeah, actually they're both 78 minutes. It goes at a pretty quick pace, so yeah. You don't really need a big story for a type of thing like this. I mean, there is a lot of the environmental subtext with the film, given its plot. You know, don't poach animals, treat animals with respect, all that. But considering the main characters are animals, it's bound to be in there in some form or another. And you know how I feel about Ebert, but I am going to mention what he talked about with the film. He gave it a 3 out of 4 stars, by the way. And this is one of those quotes of his that it shows that he does know a little bit about what he's talking about when it comes to film, even if other times you're like, okay, you're talking out your butt, boy. Here's what he had to say about this film. Animation can give us the glory of sights and experiences that are impossible in the real world, and one of those sights, in The Rescuers Down Under, is of a little boy clinging to the back of a soaring eagle. The flight sequence and many of the other action scenes in this new Disney animated feature create an exhilaration and freedom that are liberating, and the rest of the story is fun too. And see, even Ebert, you're probably watching that in theaters going, whoa. And I can't really praise the animation enough. I think I've already talked about that ad nauseum at the beginning. Now, one thing that's fun about the animation is this is the first 100% digital feature ever made. The animation and backgrounds were traditional, but all the coloring, effects, and the final film printing were done digitally. And, of course, it was produced with Disney's Academy Award-winning CAPS production system, which was developed for this film. Which is probably another reason why, even if they wanted to kind of scrap it because they lost faith in it, they're like, yeah, we already invested all this money in it, so we're going to go with it. And, of course, it cut the production time down by 6 months, which is probably why in the years since a lot of animation has switched fully to digital, even if they're doing the hand-drawn style. And it was also released as a double feature with the Mickey Mouse short, The Prince and the Pauper, which was the first short since Mickey's Christmas Carol. Which I remember seeing as a kid, but I don't really remember watching a lot of The Prince and the Pauper. And that's really all the notes there. All in all, The Rescuers Down Under is a fun film. Definitely one that if I ever do have children, I'll show them when they're young. Just so, you know, just like see the beauty of that one scene. If I ever, well, probably best to show them on the big TV too. And if it ever does have another release in theaters, it's definitely one that I want to see, even if it's just like a local one, like at the Frida. Of course, one day down the road, I'll probably have to rewatch the original and get my modern thoughts on it, see if I still do enjoy it, or it's an okay one, but the sequel's better. It's one that I'm glad has found its audience. Now, of course, The next film has always had its audience, and if The Little Mermaid is what retroactively started the Disney Renaissance, this is the one that properly kicked it into gear. Of course, next we're going to talk about one of my favorite Disney films, one that I have reviewed on here before. That, of course, is going to be Beauty and the Beast. But that, of course, is next time, everybody.